Hi, it's Richard Napier here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our incredibly long series about the example projects for Oracle Policy Modeling. And we're in February 2026, and this is the last in a series of 3 videos that were done to welcome 3 new example projects into the family. So this third one is called the Create HR Help Desk Request. And just in case you've never done it before, remember that you can get your example projects by opening OPM, going straight to example projects, and then selecting the one that you're after. They are not downloaded from the internet. If you've installed OPM, they're already there. They just need to be unpacked. So you can even do this when you're sitting in a train or a plane and you want to experiment with some examples. So we can see that this example is HR, HCM oriented. We can see that it has a form, so there's a document that the end user can take away from this particular policy model. There's also some dynamic visibility of text, which they call label visibility. It uses value lists, and it basically was built as a demonstration of how to set up a policy modeling interview so that it can be embedded into Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk, and the data, therefore, maps to Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk. The keywords, the fields, the attributes that we find in there maps to Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk. However, there are a few interesting things that we can talk about, even though it has a very simple goal. Let's start backwards for a change. Let's go to the end product, which is an interview. The interview is something that the end user will partake of. Remember that even though it was designed to be mapped into Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk, you can still run it in the debugger. I've been playing around with the files, so I need to just make sure that everything is not messed around with. There we go. Let's debug it. And you will see, of course, that because it's targeting Fusion HR Help Desk, it's using the Redwood theme. So one thing you have to get used to is that the interview tab shows the generic layout, or we'll call it the traditional color scheme and layout. But of course, when you run it in the debugger, the look and feel is different because you're using the Redwood theme. That's because over in your styles, it's been set to Redwood. So let's click OK. And let's go and pay a little attention to the Data tab. Now, the Data tab, I have to sort of separate my desire to be a policy modeler from what this is trying to achieve. This is trying to show you how to map data in and out of Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk. So it requires that in the mapping settings, we have a connection to HR Help Desk. Obviously, if you don't have one, you can still play around with the project, but you will never be able to embed it in HR Help Desk. The model implies that the sole goal of this project is to create a new HR Help Desk request. That's how it's been set up. It doesn't load anything from HR Help Desk. It just drops a brand new request into HR Help Desk. And that means that the data that you can see here, the majority of the data is going to be mapped out, meaning it's going to be sent to HR Help Desk at the end of it. So we can see, for example, the subject, which the user is going to fill in at some point, I would imagine. It's mapped out to something called title. So within HR Help Desk, there's a field called title, and that field is required in HR Help Desk. So that's why you see the red star. And that's why we've had to map it out in this particular example. There are a couple of special fields in here, load response status and save response status, which are mapped in. These are technical fields that are sent from Fusion HR Help Desk. If there's a message to be given, for example, submitting your case failed, that's the kind of field that you will get that technical data in there. So technical people will want to see the data in there. For example, if they go into the hub and they enable interview debug log, they'd be interested to see what happened, why did the interview go wrong, that sort of thing. So they're technical fields. There's one other field that is mapped in, the SR number, but it's mapped in a very special way. Most of us, when we think of being mapped in, think of it being mapped in at the beginning of an interview. For example, maybe I'm loading a customer's details into an interview, so that would be load at start. The SR number is load after submit, which kind of makes sense in the sense that the request number will only be available after the user has submitted their request. So hence load after submit. So that's a very common one, to use load after submit in order to, for example, specify it as a goal and say that's our objective. Or for example, most common is display it on the very last page. So you say, thanks very much, here's your request number. And if something went wrong, show them the details of the technical fields that I just mentioned. Remember that when you're submitting data to Fusion HR Help Desk or Oracle Siebel or any of the other applications, any application that you decide to connect to, the typical layout is the penultimate page is the one that has the submit button, precisely so that you can have the last page as a landing page that says, thank you very much, this is your request number, or this is your whatever it is. And if something's gone wrong, we can also display the something's gone wrong message. So that is how the load after submit gets to work. Because even though we submit towards the end of the interview, it's not the last page. So the request number is available to us after submit. So it's available if we reach this point. Going back to the interview itself and the data tab, I'm not a great fan of this because attribute text is supposed to be natural language. So instead of seeing things like HR category, I would expect to see something like the report date, with an article, and with things written properly in the language of the interview. I do understand that the goal of this example is not to spend time telling you about an HR policy. Its goal is to show you how to connect an interview to Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk with mapped in and mapped out and mapped in after submit and that sort of thing. So whilst I'm uncomfortable with giving an example that has what in my world would be badly named attributes, they don't use natural language, not all of them at any rate, I understand where this is going. The main goal of this is to explain how to create a connected interview. As far as content for learning is concerned, there is an interesting form template which you definitely could use as a learning opportunity, because when I see that form and I open it up, it's a very simple form. So a learning opportunity would be to add more questions to your interview. For example, we could say, well, I'm going to add a new attribute here, and I'm going to map it out to, let's say, I can never find something when I want it, something useful. Let's map it out to time zone code. So we're going to ask the person what time zone they're in. Okay. And we're going to map it out to time zone code. And of course, I'm going to have to ask them what their time zone code is, because if I haven't, I can't guess it. So, and of course, you can see where this is going, because just asking what is the time zone code isn't very friendly. I would probably have to create a dropdown, and I would have to create values. So, and we'd have to find out what the correct format was for the time zones for the Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk application. I can't just invent a bunch of time zones, but let's assume that I have the correct time zones. I've only put one in, but let's assume I've done them all correctly. I would then, with my new attribute called the time zone code, mapped out to time zone code, go and check in Oracle Fusion HR Help Desk to make sure that the time zone was actually updated. And at the same time, you can see where this is going maybe, I would, in my form here, decide to load the necessary data into my form. So those of you who've never done this before, it can feel a little weird at first, but when you build a form, you get a special folder inside your project that contains the form according to the language that you're using. You notice I clicked on ENUS. And it has this thing called a sample file, which is basically sample data, so that when you build this form, this tool understands what kind of data we're talking about. So it knows that if I go down here and I say, I want to add a new field. So let's add a new field. In order to be able to get my field to show up in that tool, I need to add a name here, often called a public name, makes it public. And I need to go into my form design in Microsoft Word, and I need to reload that sample data. And with a bit of luck, I'm now able to add time zone to my form. So you could add new fields, add new attributes, add new questions, add new value lists, add it to your form. So nice way of extending out this example project without too much worrying about the different kinds of policy for HR. That's not the goal of this particular project. It's to help you understand how Oracle Policy Modeling interacts with HR Help Desk. Finally, when we look at the Submit button, remember that the Submit button also can send that report to HR Help Desk. So it's not just necessarily for an end user to look at. In this case, it's going to go straight into HR Help Desk as a PDF file attached to our new Help Desk request. If I wanted to, of course, I could add a new control here, and I could add a new link so that the user can download their own copy in PDF form. And when I run my debugger again, choose my time zone, fill in my details, I can test to see if my form is working properly by downloading it live here in my debugger and checking it out. Also, this is a good way of testing it if you don't happen to have HR Help Desk. Anyway, it's a very simple project, but it has a number of useful learning opportunities in it. So I'd say until next time, have a good one.